Good day, and we'd like to welcome each and every one of you once again to that of the 1611 King James Bible Study with Brother Tim Beatty. We truly appreciate all your prayers that went up for us last week. Last Saturday evening, we'd received a call that one of our dear and precious friends had passed away. A lady that we one time used to be her pastor, and then Sunday morning, me and my wife had went up and spent the morning all morning long with that family, and through running backwards and forwards, going here and there. And then Thursday we went up, or Wednesday we went up, and they had the visitation. We stayed around and visited the family and the friends. And Thursday we had to hold that funeral, and I tell you, it's just been a lot on us all at once. But we're so thankful for God that we was able to get through that. And able to be maybe a help to that family in some way as we held that funeral. Very close-knit family, and I want to say this: I truly hope and pray that you will continue to pray for that family. They're going to desperately need it through the coming weeks. You take a family that is that close-knit, it's not very easy to forget or to get over, or to get over anything like that, especially when a loved one is taken very suddenly and you're not even expecting it. You just, I don't believe, ever get a past that. That's what happened with me and my dad. He was taken very unexpectedly, here one minute and gone the next. And you just don't really get over something like that. It's just so many things seems like is left undone, or I don't know how you would call it or how you would say it, but you just don't have closure, or be able to spend the final times the way you would like to spend with a loved one. But anyway, we thank God for your prayers. I want to say this: if you've not subscribed to our channel, we would love to for you to, and we'd love for each and every one of you to leave a comment. If you have someone you'd like for us to help you pray about or pray for, or if there's a situation in your life, it don't matter. We would be honored to help you pray in these matters. And I also like for you to pass this channel on to your friends, let them know about it. And like we have said before, we're not here to sugarcoat the Word of God. We're here to tell you the truth, what thus saith the true Word of God. Been in the ministry 26 years, and we've not changed in all these 26 years. And don't plan on changing. Christ never changed. The Bible said He was the same yesterday, today, and forever. And that's what it's going to take to get conviction back into this world, is get back in the true Word of God. These new modernized Bibles has taken the power of God out of them. They've taken the conviction out of them. But with the old-fashioned 1611 King James Bible, it's still just as powerful today as it was some 2,000 years ago, and it's still doing the work today that it did then. This week, we're going to change gears somewhat, and we're going to get into a little bit deeper of a study. And we're going to be studying on that of the priesthood, the high priest primarily, and exactly what all his requirements was, what his dress code was to be, everything concerning that priest. We want to get into this. Now, they was that of the high priest, and then there was priest and under him. And we want to be able to do this in a two-part series, get the priest line put out here, or the study of the priest put out, and then next week bring the priest over into that of Christ as him now being that of our high priest. So we want to get right on into the study, and for each and every one of you would love to study up on the priesthood and all the things that was required. If you'll go to the book of Exodus, starting at about the 21st chapter, I believe it is, and read all the way through Exodus, the 30th chapter. It's got in line everything that is to be set in order concerning that of the priests, the house of God, and anything else pertaining to that of worshiping that of the Lord, the things that were set down in order, how they had to be done, and the reason they had to be done. And It's a great study to see just how much goes into that of being a high priest. Now, as we begin to get into the study, a high priest, or that of the priesthood, was often referred to as the chief priest. The high priest was sometimes referred to as the chief priest, the one over all. And he was to be of that of the Hebrew people, especially of the Levitical priesthood. Now, that word Levitical primarily means from the tribe of Levi. Now, every priest had to be from that, had to be a Levitite. But not every Levitite were priests, but he had to be of the Levitical tribe. And then we go on in to see how we can trace the first priest all the way back unto that of Aaron. He was the first high priest that was ordained from and by that of God. And he was taken and separated to be that high priest unto the people. And Aaron, being that of the first high priest, he is also that of the brother of Moses. He had married a woman whose name was that of Elishebel, and Yeshua. And Yeshua, a lot of people don't believe that a priest can be married, but they were. To get into the marriage here just a little bit later, but they were married, and Yeshua was that of Amminadab's father, or Amminadab was Eshuba's father, which Eshuba being that of Aaron's wife. A priest had to be from that, like we said, of the Levitical priest line. He had to come from that of the Levitite tribe, come out of the Levitite tribe. And like we said, not all Levitites were priests, but every priest had to be of the Levitical tribe. And they were the ruler, the high ruler of that of the house of God. And the high priest were the supreme religious head of that of the people. And if you want to get into the marriage on that of Aaron, you can find that in Leviticus 21 and 10, or Exodus 21:10. No, it's Leviticus 21:10. And then to read about that of the high priest and how he is over all that of the people, you can study on that in 2 Chronicles chapter 19, I believe, verse 11. All right, the firstborn of every high priest, once that high priest died, the firstborn was then to take his place. The first elder son of the high priest was to take the office of that of his father after his death. And the high priest was to be very distinguished from that of the fellow priests. The other priests, they was priesting under him, but he was to be very extinguished from them, primarily by the clothing in which he wore and the duties in which he performed, and also particularly the requirements that was placed upon him. Now I want to show you just for a minute that of a high priest in which he would appear back in the days of old. Now there is the high priest. You can see all of his dress wire, all of his head wire, and there's a plate right there on the middle of his chest, right, well, if I can get it, right there, that plate right there, we're going to talk about it. And then there's two little pouches. There's one right there and then one right under his heart. Both of them is placed right near the heart. We're going to talk about them just a minute. But now the high priest, whenever he was ordained by that of God, He was to be consecrated in all of this. He was to be a priest, or rather to be a priest, you had to be without any type of a birth defect. What I mean by that, you could not have no birthmarks. You could have no deformities about you. Your speech had to be of a plain speech. You could not have a stuttering problem or anything like that, or a cleft lip or anything. You had to be pretty well born without any birth defects whatsoever about you. Now, if the elder son so happened to be born with a type of a birth defect, then the priesthood would go down to the next of the elder son, and it would continue on until there was a son found that had no blemishes or birth defects about him. Just like in sacrificing the animals that they had to sacrifice, they had to be without spot and without blemish when they were sacrificed unto that of the Lord. We also find in having that, they could have no defects or anything like that, and you can also read about that concerning these, where they could not have any blemishes about them in Leviticus 21, chapter 21, verses 6 and 8. Also, a high priest could not show any grief whatsoever for that of the dead. Even if it was his own children or that of his own mother and father, he could not in any way, shape, fashion, or form show any grief. Neither could he tear or rent that of his clothing in a form of mourning. He was not allowed to show this in any way. He could not remove that of his headdress. He could not let his hair go unkept or uncombed. That's what it means to be unkept. That means combed. He could not let it go ungroomed. He had to keep his hair looking very neatly at all times. And like I said, he could not tear his clothing in that of a matter of grieving of any sort, or he could not even go near that of a dead body. None whatsoever. For a priest was to, a priest, other words, to leave that of his duties unperformed because of a death would profane rather that of the house of God. Or the sanctuary is what we call it, and you can read about that in Leviticus 21 and 12. Also, he could only marry a virgin, and it had to be of his own people or that of someone that believed in God. She could not be a widow. She could not be a divorcee. She had to be of a woman in which had never been with man. That was one of the high orders that were given unto that of a priest concerning that of marriage. Now, the way a high priest was ordained back in the biblical days, a holy priest, or a high priest rather, he was consecrated by that of a service which lasted primarily that of 7 days. At that of the tabernacle, and you can read about this, or that of the temple rather, in Exodus 29. Also in Leviticus chapter 8, I believe it also discusses some matters about it. He was to be cleansed by bathing. Then he was to be dressed in that of the garments and the symbols which he was to be that was to be worn in that of the ministry, and he was to be anointed with that of special oil, and was to be sanctified or sacrifice, and he was to sacrifice himself to a sin offering unto that of God, and or a burnt offering. A sin offering is that of a burnt offering. and he was to be consecrated and to consecrate that offering. Offerings were made primarily for him during this 7-day event in order to what we call ordain. But he was being set apart and being ordained into the priesthood, going through all of these rituals. And then after he went through that, he was again to be anointed with that of oil and with the blood of the sacrifice that were made for that of his sin offering. And then he become, after all of this was done, become the Holy One of the Lord. And you can read about that in Exodus 28 and 41 and also 29:9, and seems to me like Psalms 106, and I think it's about 16 or 17. You can read about how they were to be brought into the priesthood. In other words, how they were to be ordained into that of the priesthood. Now, the clothing that a high priest was to wear was that of very special garments. And they presented the very function as a mediator between God and man. All of his clothes that he wore were symbolic in some way toward that of God. We see that being the mediator between God and the people, he was to be also over that of the treasury that was set apart in that of the house of God. He was also over it. He wore that of what was called a coat, also a girdle, and a robe or a turban that was about their head. Let me talk about that turban just for a few moments, if I may. And it was called a mitre, M-I-T-R-E, mitre, or known as a turban, or that of a prayer shawl. Now, I want to show you a picture between the difference between that of a high priest and that of just a Jewish headdress in which they wore. Now, if you can see that headdress, there is a band at the bottom of it, and then there is different sewings, and you can't see that very well, but I will be showing you one in plain. But notice how the headdress there is. Now, that headdress would come down off of his head. He would drape it around, and also that's what he would pray in under. Now, just for a regular Jew or Israelite, their headdresses also, see the difference in the way they are. That was more like that what you would call a throw, but they was used for many different things concerning that in the life in which they left. Now, that of the priesthood, my son had bought this for me this past Christmas, this Sunday. We took it to church and had it anointed by that of the deacons and the preachers and the elders of the church, 7 of them. Now, across the band, if you can see starting here, that was placed on the front of your forehead. And it goes all the way across. And there's inscriptions there. If you'll see that inscriptions that is wrote there, and those inscriptions in the Hebrew tongue stands for holiness to the Lord. Then on each side here, there was a block, and there was a tassel. And each one of these tassels had 5 knots tied in them, symbolizing the number 5 is that of grace. Each one of these little tassels that you see here represented not only the 10, but all the commandments that was given unto God. It was only made from that of the royal colors of that of man. They are one color that is kind of a grayish look that is right in here. and that represents that of the people, how that they are stained, they are tainted, and with all of this, their sins are wrapped up in the sacrifice and the prayers that the high priest would lift up unto the Lord. On each corner, you'll find an inscription that is reading on it. Each corner has a inscription that is placed upon every corner of it. That's the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and that of man. And that's primarily what looked like that was placed upon their head. And like I say, it was known as a prayer shawl or a mantle, in which the Bible refers to it. All right. Also, there was that of Ephraim, which was that of a two-piece apron, and it went over their shoulders, and it reached down unto that of their hips. And it was made of that of royal colors also, which the same as the turban in which they wore. It was also made of royal colors, and the colors was to be made of that of purple, blue, scarlet, gold, and white were in these two precious piece of clothwear in which they wore. And it was, every one of these was sold with that of gold thread. That's what they were put together with, was the sewing of that of fine gold thread. And it had 2 Oxford stones bearing the names of that of the 12 tribes of Israel, which was fastened to the shoulders of it. And you can read about that in Exodus 28, 5 and 14, and 10, 28, 15 and 30, I believe is where it's at. Then after the clothes wear in which they were wearing, and which with all this clothes wear, other words, it allowed them to bring the whole nation before God in all his priestly acts, because every bit of the clothwear that he obtained, regardless of what act he was performing, there was a piece of that clothwear that represented God or that of the tabernacle in some way, regardless of what act he performed. And in Exodus 28, 5 and 14, you can read about that. The breastplate of judgment was made of some materials and was attached to the front of the ephraim. Now, we'll get into the ephraim in a little bit. You can read about that in Exodus 28, 15, and 30. Like we said, and on the front were that of 12 precious stones. That's that little square thing that I pointed out to you there. And each one of them had a little pocket in it. And in each pocket there was a little stone with the engraving of each tribe of Israel that was placed there on it. And it had the 12 names of each tribe of Israel that was there in the pocket. And then directly over the heart, he wore, and there was sewed in another little patch. And here was placed the Ephraim and the Thummim. Now the Ephraim and the Thummim was that of 2 very precious stones or gems, in which they used in certain circumstances to get an answer from God, or let God give them the answers by casting or rolling. You've heard the term in the Bible, they cast lots. Well, this is what these stones were. It was the Ephraim and Thummim. And they would cast these, and depending on how the lots would lay or how they would turn, or would then let them know what God has decided in whatever matter it was that they was trying to resolve. And which showed you that little red square that was placed or so upon the heart, and also the other one that was right in under it, that was also sewed right over the heart. Now, and this is where the two precious stones or gems was kept, where they, in very special events, required God to give them the answer concerning whatever situation it was. And you can read about that in Exodus chapter 28, verse 30, I believe it is. And then these were, like we said, the very special stones or the gems, and they were carried by only that of the high priest. Only the high priest had these. The other priests in under him did not have the stones of Ephraim and Thummim. It was only the high priest that carried these. And they were used, of course, like we said, for God to determine the outcome of certain matters or certain things. And over the breastplate, there he wore that of a blue robe, of that of Ephraim, in Exodus 28:31. And its hem were woven in that of pomegranates, which pointed to the divine law as a sweet and delicious spiritual fruit unto that of the Lord. In Deuteronomy 8:3, you can read about that. And on the bottom of the Ephraim, there was tied that of bells. And the bells would ring as whenever he went into the Holy of Holiness, these bells would continue to ring. If at any time, and before he went in, there was always a rope attached to that of the high priest. And on the end of the rope, that of the children of Israel, or primarily the children of the tribe of Levite, held the other end of that of the rope. And as long as he was in that of the Holy of Holiness, sending up prayers for that of the people, as long as those bells were ringing, they knew he was alive. But at any time, if these bells quit ringing, they knew for whatever reason he had been struck dead by God. And primarily the reason a priest would be struck dead like that is because he went in unworthy. There was something he did not do right. There was maybe some type of part of that of his clothes wear he forgot. It could be many different things. But when they went into that of the Holy of Holiness, it had to be done exactly without taking away or adding to anything the way God said that they was to approach him. And if you want to read about the bells and everything, like I said, I believe it's in Exodus 28:35 or 28:25, no, it's 28:35. You can read about that. And on the head of the high priest, he wore that of what we said, the crown, or the gold, that had the golden engravings of that of the words holiness unto the Lord. And in Exodus 28:36 and 37, you can read about that, where it speaks of that. And not only that, he was to represent as bearing. He was a representation, rather, of bearing. Now get this, because this will come on into the second part of the study when we get into the Christ as being that of our high priest. But he was representing and bearing that of the sins or the iniquities of that of the children of Israel. And of the holy things which Israel offered unto that of God, and crowned that of the mediator, making an atonement for that of the nation, so God might accept the gifts in which the children of Israel brought unto the Lord for their sacrifice, in hopes that God would accept their offerings for whatever they was offering it up for, whether it was a sin offering or whatever offering it could be standing for, a transgress offering or a trespass offering or whatever the offering represented. They was bulls, they was sheep, they was cows, or bull, sheep, bull, oxen, cows. There was pigeons, turtle doves, all different types of animals that could be offered, and each one of these animals stood for a different type of a sin offering. Now, a lamb without spot or blemish was usually the one that was used for that of the sin offering for the people or the children of the nation of Israel. And all the garments stood for that a priest wore. Every one of the garments that he had on stood for that of the beauty and the glory of that of God that was placed upon him. They all represented the beauty and the glory of that of God. And God placed upon his priest that was placed upon that of God's priest, and it was sacrificing them to, or sanctifying them. God sanctified unto that of the priest, that they may minister in his name to that of the children of Israel. God spoke directly unto that of the priest during the days of old. Very seldom did you hear God speaking directly to an individual person. He was always speaking to that of the priest. Now, there are a few exceptions, like Miriam, or not Miriam, but the bondswoman or the handmaiden that Abraham's wife that he had the first child with, and her and her son went out in the desert, and the angel of the Lord spoke to her. But God directly, that was the angel of the Lord, but God directly spoke only primarily to that of the priest in Exodus 28:38 and also 28:40, all the way down through there, like I said, to get the full impact of how a priest was to do all the duties that was to be performed, how they was to dress, what they was to do in order to be ordained, the ritual they had to go through for that of 7 days. You can begin reading in Exodus chapter 21 all the way through Exodus chapter 30, and you can read all about the priesthood and everything lined up concerning that of the laws and the judgments and all of these things, the sin offerings, the clothes wear, and all of this that pertains to that of the priest. But I want to say this. As we look at how God's house was to be respected in the most high way, the most highest was to be given that of the greatest respect above all things, no matter what it was. It was to be given that of the most highest respect. It's really a shame to see just how the house of God has become this day and time. People no longer respect the house of God like they did then. I've seen people get up behind a pulpit, so-called preachers, and knowing good and well the life they was living out every day. The Bible said you'll know them by the fruits they bear. And then them step behind a pulpit would scare me to death to do that, in fear that God could strike a body dead going behind there and you not fit to be behind there. There's everything and anything goes on in God's house today. But my friend, if you lived back then, God would strike you dead. If you came into the house of the Lord and you had things in your life that should not be there, He would strike you dead. You took care of all of these things before you ever went into the Holy of Holiness. Outside, there was all these rooms. There was the inner court, the outer court, the court of the Gentiles, the court of the women, the court of the men. But as you started approaching into that of the house of God, there was a place that you were to wash your hands. There was a place that you were to make that of a sacrifice. There was a place in which the shewbread and the 7 candlesticks laid. And you had to go through all of these things and make sure that when you entered, there was nothing whatsoever between you and God. Because if they was, when you got in there, God would strike you dead because you approached him unworthy. And our churches, this day and time, has totally and completely lost the respect of God's house. And it's only by God's grace and God's mercy, he's not wiped most of the people out. It truly is. And each and every one of you knows exactly what I'm talking about. Half the churches and half the preachers this day and time are out for all the money they can get. It's nothing to do whatsoever with your soul and loving your soul enough to keep you out of a devil's hell. It's all about how much money they can get and how much they can prosper out of it. That's what it's about. And they have left their first love, as the book of Revelation says. They've left their first love, the main principle, what it was all about. And my friend, I will say this. We truly need to get back and to get God's house back in order. If you ever expect to see those great miracles and those great movements of God once again get into his house, it's going to take getting his house back in order. And it's going to take going in there with your whole heart in the hopes to fully and completely worship in him and let God impress upon people's heart what God needs them to do in the house of God instead of man telling you what to do or what not to do. That's the day that God needs to inspire upon the hearts of people what he needs them to do, because he knows what's there, what's going to be there, and what is going to be needed to help that person maybe get saved, maybe with a burden, maybe with a broken heart, whatever. But our churches is so far out of order today, they've kicked God out and stepped up thinking they can do it better than God. And my friend, I'm sorry, I know this may anger some preachers, but the truth is the truth. And it's going to take the truth in order for God's houses to get set free from man again. It's going to take the truth to get you set free from the ways of man. And it's going to take the truth in order that it may get you back in line with God, but me in line with God, all of us back in line with God where we need to be, so God can start moving in that of great and miraculous ways in which he once did. And it's not been that many years back since our churches was filled and there was order in the church. 30, 40 years ago, our churches still had a lot of order in them, and there was still a lot of miraculous things being done in our churches then. But today they kicked God out and decided they can do it better. So I say this, the house of God is a very holy thing. It's very holy. And God looks upon his house as being something very sacred for that of his people. Something very clean for that of his children. A place that his children can go and get help, or get lifted up, or get filled up with that of his spirit. Now there's a lot of people getting filled up, but I'm sorry. The majority of that is just a good old feel-good time that you can get out here at any ball game or any beer joint or anything else you want to go attend. A lot of that is a feel-good of man. It's not a feel-good of God. It's not. I'm sorry. It is not. There's a big difference, my friend, when you see God move on somebody and you see it's real. There's going to be a lot of evidence there that it's of God. And you'll see a great difference between that movement and the happy-go-lucky movement of that of man. It's completely different all the way around. So let's pray one with another, that we can maybe at least get a few churches back in the line with that of God, that their ministers, the pastors that God has set over that church, that he would get enough of boldness about him to get enough of love about the souls, that he would be willing to get the house of God back in order, that that soul may be helped or healed or saved or whatever needs to be. We need to get back to the ways of God instead of letting everything be overrun with the ways of man. And I truly hope and pray that maybe somehow, some way, this has been a blessing to you. I hope it's helped you. I hope it's helped you to understand more about the duties of that of a priest, what was required of him, why the garments was set apart so separately from that of the other priests and that of the other Israelites, in showing that of all the glory of God and what God expected of that man in order that he may be the person that he could communicate with that could be a help to that of the children of Israel. And that's what we all need to be, is a help to that one toward another, and let the help that we give them be the help that God places upon our heart to give them. And if we do that, then all things will work out to the glory of those who love the Lord. And until next time, stay safe, be blessed. Please remember, subscribe if you've not. Pass this station on to some of your friends. Leave a comment. Anyone you want us to help you pray about or whatever, feel free to do so. And I'll assure you that I would be more than glad to help you pray for those or these problems or whatever it is you're seeking. I would love to join you in praying about these matters. And until next time, may the blessings of God always be upon you.